Cod is thrust farther into the North Atlantic than any other part of the American mainland. Its marshes are way stations for migrating birds. Its freshwater ponds are key to its past. Its dunes are key to its future. Its shifting sandbars are an ever-present danger to shipping. Cape Cod is a rare example of geology in action, and this is how it came to be. Cape Cod is a child of the Ice Age. 20,000 years ago, a continental ice sheet covered the area it now occupies. The glacier was 2 miles thick in places. It scoured and pulverized the surface of the Earth, picked up the debris, and carried it south. Cape Cod is built from the shattered rock of New England and the Gulf of Maine. The ice sheet had reached its maximum southerly advance. Mountain glaciers covered the western ranges, and a continental glacier covered the Great Lakes and all of New York and New England. The winters were long, the summers too short to melt the gathering snow, so it turned to ice. South of the glaciers, the land was braided with rivers flowing across outwash plains, through the tundra, and through mile after mile of stunted forest. Meltwater from the glaciers was laden with the material that was to become Cape Cod. About 15,000 years ago, the ice withdrew a short distance. The moraines and outwash plains became Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. The lobes of ice fluctuated back and forth for about 1,000 years. The Cape Cod Bay lobe was in the center. A cross-section through the Cape Cod Bay lobe shows it between fluctuations. As it retreated, the land subsided, collapsing the head of the outwash plain. Blocks of ice were dropped and formed kettle holes. As the glacier began to advance again, it drove into the material of the outwash plain, shearing it into layers, riding over it, then stopping before retreating again. When the ice front retreated for good, its end moraines and outwash plains became Cape Cod, the glacial lake bed, Cape Cod Bay. Reminders of the Ice Age are common on the Cape. Kettle holes were formed when giant pieces of ice were stranded by the retreating glacier. As these ice blocks melted, the sand and gravel around them collapsed, forming a pit. Fresh water filled many of them, forming the ponds on the Wellfleet outwash plain. Most of the boulders on the outwash plains of the Cape were wrenched from bedrock to the north and transported by the ice. Some were still resting where they fell from the melting ice. About 14,000 years ago, the glacier began to retreat again as the climate warmed. Sea level was rising fast. So much of the world's water was in the ice cap that the Atlantic Ocean was 400 feet lower than today. The area now known as George's Bank, in the lower right, was cut off from the mainland and became a huge island for a time. The sea finally flooded George's Bank and the coastal plain. From the beginning, the coastline was being sculpted, as it always will be, by the awesome power of the North Atlantic. was still rising. The outer beach was 3 miles farther out to sea than it is today. One of the few certain things about the Cape is that it will change. Cape Cod's shoreline is made from pulverized rock, brought here by a glacier over thousands of years. Ever since, the North Atlantic has been taking it away. For 6,000 winters, Cape Cod has been battered by storms. When gale winds drive high tides even higher, low-lying areas are flooded, buildings destroyed. The shoreline dramatically eroded. In the path of this onslaught, the coastline retreats an average of 3 feet a year. This adds up to about 5 acres. There is no resisting the ocean. Wherever people build, they find that nothing is permanent, not even the Cape. This reworking of the coastline is as old as the sea and as natural as the process of life and death itself. Every winter, the sea repeatedly removes and then returns a thick layer of sand. In the following series, watch the level of sand rise and fall on the same stretch of beach. The first scene is November 14th. A month later. 3 weeks after that. 2 days. Another 2 days. In 3 more weeks. In 2 more weeks. And in 7 more days on February 20th. Some of this sand moves parallel to the coast and is added to each end of the outer beach. As a result, Monomoy Island to the south is growing. Sand moves if nothing binds it together, even if it's beyond the reach of the sea. The wind is the other great force, relentlessly forming and reforming the Cape. Together with the sea, it makes new land from old. The great dunes of the province lands are built from material borrowed from ancient glacial deposits. Even the dunes themselves are on the move. Driven by the wind, they can bury the forests in their way. In the path of this dune, the trees have been killed by the rising tide of sand. The few plants that can grow here are crucial to the stability of the land. The poverty grass, the beach grass, and other plants bind the sand together, stabilizing it against wind erosion. The plant communities growing in the Cape today are only the latest in a long succession of colonists that have come and gone since the ice retreated. They form habitats, populated in turn by a succession of creatures. Some move into its protected shallows for mating and maturing, for shelter, and for seasonal feeding. Cape Cod is one of the most important stopovers on the Atlantic Flyway. Birds can rest and feed here on their marathon migrations. It's a summer nesting ground for terns. It's winter quarters for seals. And it's a year-round home for the adaptable raccoon. life it supports form an integrated system. It is an arm of sand thrust into the North Atlantic, and this very exposure makes it what it is. But it may not be here forever. For Cape Cod is made of glacial sand and constant change.